Next up, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Firstly, we have Jason, the CEO and co-founder of Veritech. We have Gary Lowe, the founder and chairman of Demuto, and Ellen, which you've met, which is the co-chairman, of SGTech blockchain community, as well as the head of the Blockchain Center of Competency in IBM APAC. And lastly, we also have Joseph, who will be the moderator for the panel discussion later on. Joseph is the head of global business development at Tribe. So Jason will get the ball rolling by sharing more about how Veritech is tackling food safety through increasing the verifiability of food products. Jason, please.
Hi, everyone. Jason here. I'm the CEO and the founder of Veritech. So just a quick dive in on what Veritech has done on food tracking in the last 7 years. So no problem on the slides. I can see the slides clearly, right?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So basically the key problem that people face when it comes to food traceability and fake food is that first and foremost is on the food product documentation. There's no standard. And a lot of the information that you can't be sure whether the information is correct or wrong. You just depend on the label or the piece of paper that tells you what are the info there, which may or may not be true. Second is that a lot of dubious marketing on the product itself. Whatever product you receive, okay, whatever they claim, how can we be sure that it is the real one? Okay. Say for example, Wagyu beef, there's a more than 90% chance that where they claim that the Wagyu beef is from Japan, but they're actually not. But they could be from places like Australia and US, but they're definitely not what they claim to be from Japan itself. Okay. And what has Veritech done over the past 7 years to solve this issue? Okay, by using technology. And how we use this technology to solve this problem? Okay. Basically, we are combining software and hardware together. Why there's a need to do that is because you have to identify the product. So you have to really tag the product to give identity to the product in order to continue the way to able to track and trace the product. Okay. So what does this mean? It means that for Veritech, we ourselves, okay, now what we have done is that we have created what we believe okay, to be a full one-stop solution for food traceability. So how do we do that? First is we have an integrated system, meaning that all the documentations, the documents relating to the product itself will be tracked and traced on a government trusted trade trust platform. Okay. So you have this step of the process to solve your documentation problem. Second is on the IoT integration. We have to know where the product goes from and where it goes to. So IoT integration is important. So in this aspect, we work closely with ST Engineering to put GPS trackers on pallet or on container itself that will be linked to each individual batch of product. Now we come to the third and last part, which is the most important part, is identifying the product. For us, we, as fellow Singaporeans, we do the most kiasu method. We don't just tag the product using one QR. We tag with dual QR. A product QR, which shows all the information about the product, and the hidden QR, which when scanned will void the product. And this QR itself is not a serial number or running number. It's randomly generated so that it cannot be fake or it cannot be analyzed from just the label number or from the batch number. Okay, next, just a simple run through about how a product goes into China. Okay, so on the normal flow is always like that. You have to have a documentation and certification ready. And after that, you get all these informations to the custom. And with all this information, the custom, right, the custom will allow you to create a label. Okay, so bear in mind, this process is actually for export to China. Okay, so before the product goes into China, you must have an approved label with all the required information. And this is where we put our technology in place. As I mentioned, the dual QR. So the dual QR generated by us will have all the information linked to the cloud database, linked to the blockchain. And upon when all these products are ready, okay, this batch of products will be linked to a single IoT device that will track and trace the product all the way from the source to the destination. Okay, so as it goes, once it arrives at the final destination, what the customer need to do is just simply scan the QR to verify the information. Okay, and as the process goes through, right, upon reaching the consumer side, any information can be easily scanned, read just from a QR itself, and each information can be easily accessed. And the best thing is that because we are running on both the product QR and the sale QR, we can actually put different programs and loyalty programs into the system itself to encourage customers themselves to scan and check the product. Okay. And with that, I end this short presentation. If there's any questions, feel free to ask after this presentation. So I pass it over to Gary.
Thanks, Jason. Now I have to do my part and see whether it works. Does it work? Has everybody been able to see this?
Yeah.
Are we okay? Okay, so I take it that you can see it. So similar to what Jason is doing, I think Dimutu is also saying the same things, except that we look at it similar to documentation being the biggest problem. And because the real world that we operate, especially in agri-food, is really a world that is kind of disconnected and fragmented. So this is where food waste, food loss, trade dispute, financial access, customer engagement, and of course food safety, which is really the key discussion today. You can't really talk about food safety when you really don't see what's going on. So the way when we operate this business, we're a bit more particular about what you can really see besides just documentation. So for us, it's really, again, when we talk about farm to fork, it is about making sure we work closely with the farmers. And I guess Singapore is not exactly the place where we grow anything, but where we distribute and where we buy from are basically a global market, and we sell it to the global market as well. So for us, it's very important to work not just producers from Singapore, but actually the growers themselves, right from the land where the fruits are actually grown. So how do we do this at the end of the day, especially in situation where in Indonesia, where apples are being sent and somebody will claim that this apples were sent that was bad. But then what we do is that we are able now to identify the apples actually when it was packed. And again, everything is on the blockchain, everything is basically immutable. So that gives us one of the reasons why you use blockchain is so that you can have a common database where everyone can actually see. Another one of the things that we've been using this is actually to finance the trade, right? You can't finance what you can't see. And in this situation, the data that we're getting is actually significantly different from that. We're also moving things on upstream, and maybe just the way we do it, we're going down to the fruit, to the carton box, and of course our own IoT device, which is actually a vision capturing device. It means you capture the fruit and the box, and then basically you digitize the asset. This is something that we do. For example, people ask, how can you put every label on an avocado? So on the left is how a labeling machine works for an automated one. And then on the right, you will see every single box of avocados basically working on that manner. So that's how our system is working. On the platform, this is what we see very much on the timeline. All documentations are also kept in this. So every fruit and every carton is digitized, so it's visible to the trade. So we're more particular about not just what goes into a country, for example, in terms of how we distribute the fruit, but then in terms of the quality of the fruit, because it's not just about where your fruits are, but it's actually how was the fruit packed and how was the fruit arriving are the key components that we're looking at. And using, again, an app, we are now able to do a B2B to ensure that our customers are able to tell us if the fruits are well received or not. And similar, the ability for consumers to then scan a QR code or whatever other technology that we have to essentially communicate and then get the feedback. And I think that's really what this is all about, closing the loop. Because in recent cases where you need to do a fruit recall, like the white peaches from America, you need to be able to actually communicate if someone wants to check whether is this the same peaches that they're talking about. So for us in Dimuto, we've been fortunate enough to deploy our system globally. As you can see, these are all mostly fruit growing areas, right? Even all the way to the durians and stuff that people like. And that's kind of like the global presence that we have. Some of our partners include IBM, PwC. So what's next for us? Now that we've digitized it, we have systemized the system, of course, and to use AI to capitalize on ensuring that we can see things like the blemishes towards a more efficient and safe supply chain. All right, thank you very much. With this, I'll pass it on to Alan.
All right, thanks, Gary. Okay, so just a quick introduction on IBM Food Trust. So IBM Food Trust, in a nutshell, it's an information sharing platform that aims to really connect different parts of the ecosystem together to basically enable the sharing of information across the value chain. And if we kind of take a step back in terms of looking at the problems that we've kind of briefly introduced, my fellow panelists have introduced kind of some of these aspects, right? What is prevalent in a lot of these value chain today? Food safety, big problem. We talked about how there has been incident where you needed to do basically a food recall very, very quickly because it ultimately affects not just the individuals, but potentially the farmers' livelihoods as well. The other aspect that we looked at across the problems across the food value chain includes things like the supply chain. So there's potential areas of improvement, as Gary has mentioned, on the paper side of things. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is also the topic around food waste, whereby we have situations where a lot of the food is actually wasted or thrown away, mainly because, frankly, we don't really understand whether something is edible or how long it's been on the shelf, for example. And fundamentally, I think there's limited trust in the current food value chain today. So with that in mind, I've been working with a number of partners to develop this solution called Food Trust. And it comes down to a few capabilities. So one of them is basically the ability to do a trace. So one aspect is the provenance, as what Gary has kind of mentioned earlier on about tracking kind of the provenance of where food is coming from. But what you see on the picture over here is another view, which is how do I address the problem? For example, there is, for example, a suspicious batch of spinach, for example. There's a suspicious batch of mangoes, for example. Can I be surgical to figure out exactly which farm it's actually come from? Or potentially, if I need to pull this particular product from the shelf, can I do it surgically? So with the Food Trust platform, it allows that view, the end-to-end view, whether you're a regulator or a significant player in the ecosystem, to have kind of the end-to-end view and be able to sniff out very quickly downstream and upstream exactly where the food is and be very surgical to basically remove or detect or take the appropriate actions to in response to an incident like this. The other capability that the IBM Food Trust platform has is around fresh insight. So the ability to provide, again, a dashboard, help you to understand in seconds, essentially, what's your current inventory level? What's the dwell time, for example? What's the time since it's a particular produce has been shipped from harvest? Which produce is doing better than others? In which part of the country, for example, is doing better than others? So that level of analytics built on top of the base blockchain capability, properties around immutability, properties around a greater security between the different parties involved. So in a nutshell, the Food Trust platform, again, is an information sharing platform that connects the different part of the value chain, be it from the farmers, the producers, and also the retailers themselves, with the key modules around traceability, fresh insights, and the other aspect, which is around certification management. For example, associating and making sure that the produce that's being shipped has the appropriate certification. For example, halal certification, and it's making sure that the produce has the certification, it's valid and it's current. So we have the opportunity to work with a number of corporates around the world, ranging from Carrefour, who's interested to track the chicken or the meat supply, and also with the Yara International and Sukafina, that's looking at coffee, the coffee trade, and also Walmart around leafy greens, and also Golden State Foods, which has been looking at how we can actually track the meat patties freshness as well across the value chain. So I'll just end off by perhaps also teasing up some of the lessons learned, and I think we'll probably go into some of that later on in the session that Joseph will probably lead. So these are the 5 pillars that we feel that is, are important, and what we actively promote as part of the Food Trust platform itself. One of the things is looking at the business value of the platform, making sure the different parties see the value. Participation across stakeholder ecosystem is very important, because it's important. The platform is only as good as the data is provided to it. Governance, very important. Key aspects around interoperability, working with third parties. For example, working with Dimoto in terms of integrating some of the aspects of data, feeding into the platform itself. And I can't stress enough about standards. And we will leverage as much around prevailing standards, whether it's GS1 and otherwise. And the last part is around the technical aspects around the solution. And again, if you let me, I'll probably go on for a day just talking about this. So with that, I'll just end off and maybe pass the time on back to Belle.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks to all the speakers for giving a bit more of an introduction into the companies and the kind of technologies used. I'll now hand the time over to Joseph, who will lead the panel discussion. And I already see that there's a question coming up in the Q&A. So Joseph, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks, Belle. And thanks so much, fellow panelists who all happen to be limbs other than Gary. So invite you guys to turn on your video and audio as well. And yeah, jokes aside, thanks again for the opportunity, and to the co-hosts SGTech and SFMA. So quick self-introduction, Joseph, currently heading BD across Tribe Group and also heading Tribe Accelerator. So we work with corporates like IBM, startups like Veritech and Dimoto. Quick note on that front, if you got questions, please do feel free to drop them in the Q&A portion. We'll pick a couple and I'll insert them during the session. So don't wait until the end. There won't be like a fixed Q&A slot. So yeah, to start off this session, I think we want to discuss a couple of areas. First, want to look at trends on the macro level, look at potentially the benefits of traceability and how this ties into potentially food safety. And then last, as a big bucket, we want to talk about challenges for adoption. So yeah, for let's say macro trends, be curious to hear from the panelists. How do you think the landscape has changed over the past few months, given the COVID pandemic? So let's say 2019 to 2020, what do you think has changed? Invite any of you guys to share your thoughts.
Well, I'll rope in, because I think for me was one of the biggest differences. We move products around the world, especially fresh produce. And I think when the COVID hit this year, there were a lot of shortages, right? So a big difference is the last time when people talk about trace and track, there were a lot of conversation where, well, Gary, you know, it's okay because, you know, I just hop onto a plane and next thing you know, I'll be in Ohio, I'll be in Arizona. You know, that ability to travel was one that people take it for granted. And when you now can't travel between, even from your sales office in, say, Amsterdam, and your pack house is somewhere down the road, 3 hours, you can't even cross. Or in this case, between Melbourne and Sydney, they can't even cross borders domestically. Now, that whole change in mindsets has basically affected the way we work. And then when you talk about air freight, the air freight's prices basically has skyrocketed, that the price to move an empty cargo is more than the cargo itself. It's issues that I think that wake-up call was very, very, well, I guess almost immediately, it was almost like a shock to the system. So I think between 019 and 020, people 019 people think that we still have time to find about understanding all this trace and track. But when it comes to 020, suddenly everybody woke up and there was a real quick made. I think that was the biggest difference for me.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Jason, any thoughts? I think you've been in this industry. You've probably seen stuff actually move, not just build the tech. What are your thoughts from let's say friends in the industry?
Actually, basically, as what Gary has mentioned, actually basically all movement almost came to a standstill. And because of movement coming to a standstill, right, a lot of the products marketing, the products logistic itself, right, has become not as efficient as ever. So that's the biggest difference that we see. But with that, right, sometimes it came to realize that a lot of there's more needed for emphasis on the brand of the product, on the quality of the product, because in a lot of the time, there was a lot of excess wastage because of uneven distribution. So, say for example, China is big. China will buy in bulk everything. If you have the best apple, China will just go and buy the best apple and load everything there and try to sell at rock bottom price because they buy at the cheapest price. And most of the supply don't go to other place. So I think now is a time for us to really see at this point what is actually needed, not just for the purpose of marketing, not purpose of sales, not purpose of e-commerce to drive the e-commerce sales. So a lot of wastage actually comes from driving the sales actually. Now actually it's a time that we have to be more prudent. We look deep in to see what is needed, what is important, what is the quality there. And with that, I think tracking and traceability will have more and more emphasis on this area actually. Yeah, so that's my point.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary and Jason. So given people can't travel and distribution is a factor that is in play here, right? We'd love to hear from Ellen. How do you think the technology part could potentially solve distribution? Is it around, let's say, supply chain management? Or
Yeah, so I first of all, I agree with Jason and Gary about the points that they made. The other aspect I will just throw in is just this topic around resiliency. I think the whole notion of people are very interested in where their food is coming from a perspective of as an individual, the kind of food that you're consuming. But I think with the recent changes in the industry, I think the other element that's come up is this topic of resiliency, which is affecting not just individuals but just corporates or even potentially policymakers as well, just figuring out how resilient your supply chain is. So I think that's also another thing that is perhaps surfaced more recently. And on the topic around, I guess, interfacing or kind of facilitating the track and trace aspects, and I think both Gary and Jason can probably talk about their experience working with their respective set of technology. From my end, I think what has been helpful in terms of accelerating or expediting some of these solutions has been through the use of some of the standards with regards to things like GS1, for example, as one of the prevailing standards for interfacing integration. I mean, one very good example between, let's say, Dimoto and IBM, one of the conversations we have when we talk about integrating or interfacing the solutions. You guys use GS1? Yep, we do. So, it made it much easier to kind of get things going. So I think that's one thing that I think is very important. The other aspects on the technical level, from an IBM perspective, we do have published the APIs. It's out there, open. If anybody wants to build their solutions on top of that, they can use basically the standard REST-based APIs to be able to integrate interface, whether it's through a mobile web application or even through their own ERP or IoT platforms as well.
Yep, thanks, Alan. And speaking of the technology and implementation aspect, I thought we could insert one of the questions asked by Kamyu from the audience. So he wanted to understand, before we go on even further, how does the tech part work, right? So what is the role of, let's say, IoT part in the process? So calling out Jason and Gary, maybe help to explain that part a little bit more.
Well, for us, I did reply, and my reply was that IoT for us is really, well, basically IoT at the end of the Internet of Things. We have two parts that we focus on. One is the vision capturing side of it, and then the other one is the data loggers, which is the temperatures and humidities and GPS and all those stuff that is important. But if you think about it, what we use IoT for is to actually replace the person on the ground. So a lot of the times we have a lot of surveys and we have a lot of people in between. And this is the kind of thing that we want to put technology into. What we want to ensure is to have a standard, it's like what Alan said earlier, so that, you know, one surveyor from Mexico is very different from the surveyor going into different surveyors that do certain standards. So in that sense, that's kind of like the way we use IoT, to be able to use a machine to get that same standard so that the data that we captured is relevant for them. So that's the way we use IoT for Dimuto.
Okay, on the Veritech side, so for us when we do pest prevention, we actually focus on three key aspects. Okay, first and foremost is to give an identity to the product. Without identifying the product, you can't track the product and can't determine whether it's real or fake. Second is to determine all the certification and document relating to the product is real. Okay, so the second aspect. And third, most important aspect is the flow of the product, where the product comes from, where it goes to. So that's where the IoT comes in. So the difference with the IoT to our tracking is that IoT itself will track by batch. So we track each individual product uniquely, 1:1. Actually, for our case, it's 2:1. So we have 2 QR on the single label, one on the outside and one when you peel it. So when you scan the peeled label, right, you actually void the product. That's answering one of the audience the question. And when you want to track all these products, it's impossible for a person to scan every QR to track the product. So in this case, where the IoT comes in is that you have a single GPS tracker on a pallet, and this whole pallet, the tracker ID will be linked to the entire batch of products on the pallet itself. So wherever the sensor moves, all the information will be updated to the blockchain, to the cloud, and will be captured under the QR of each product. So this is what we call 1:many. Yeah, so this is how we use the IoT.
Yeah, thanks guys. And just to understand the value, right? What can this data points, does this contribute specifically to food safety, right? So let's say talking about that temperature, talking about GPS live location data, how can that help the bigger picture, right? Both on the consumer and the manufacturer level.
Gary, to you first.
Sorry, Joseph, ask the question again.
Yeah, so you're capturing all these data points, right? Like for example, temperature, live GPS data, right? How does this help potentially, let's say, the consumer, right? And and also the manufacturer itself, right? Because okay, for example, manufacturer gets better data, he sees his supply chain better, great for him, right? How does this help a consumer from a food safety aspect? So what if I see where it travels, right?
I think let's make sure that, so those information, that's why the way our operation works is that we have two parts of it, right? That means what's data for B2B side of the game is very different from what the consumer side of the game is. So the communication for consumer for us is really about where it's from, the farm, maybe even talk about the farmers, and then the way the process is, and maybe the details of it, right? But when it comes to the other details, these are actually kept between the B2B side of the game, that means the buyers and the suppliers. And fundamentally, when it comes to food, a lot of things are basically dependent on the environment that the goods are moving, especially in perishable. I mean, for us, basically, you can have viruses, or you can have salmonella. There's bacteria that can actually grow, and the temperature itself is actually a very good indicator in terms of what is basically allowing a change of environment can actually affect the produce itself. So a lot of these little details, like for example, for us, the IoT device that we talk about, we actually not only just have a camera that can do AI, but we're talking about hyperspectral cameras that can actually look at bacteria and viruses as well. So these are the kind of safety issues that is very particular for us. So for consumer, knowing where it's formed, the provenance is one key thing. But the rest of those data, I think, is really for us in the industry to ensure that we know what was packed, because that is on transit time. And then we talk about shelf life time, which is something that Alan talked about, which is really about food waste, right? If you know what you are moving during the transit time, then at the end of the day, you will also know what is required for the transit time, so that, sorry, the shelf life time, so that you don't go into food waste that basically the food can't even last. So those are kind of like the data, which is very different from what is for B2B and what's for consumer.
Maybe I'll just add in maybe just one example of where IoT has been used together with, let's say, blockchain or the track and trace platform. So one example is actually the work that was done with Golden State Foods, where they were very interested in tracking basically the meat supply. And over there, where the IoT actually came in was looking at basically the temperature of the meat. So they were interested to basically track the temperatures at different, I guess, different key points, and correlate that to what's the expectations as far as the condition of the meat through the whole kind of supply chain. So there's a video on that. If anyone's interested, I'll be happy to share that video that talks about how those the whole processing supply is tracked, not just the so as Gary has mentioned, there's a document part of it, but also the actual physical property, whether maybe there's any deviation on that. You might want to just capture that. And also there are people that are tracking, for example, through RFID readers, the number of cases of meat that's going in and out of the facility, right? That could be communicated, and that could be something that could be helpful to reduce or mitigate incidents of fraud or malpractice, for example. So that's another kind of alternative example.
Thanks again, Alan. I think we'd love to hear also if there are specific case studies where companies have leveraged these data in terms of very clear metrics, like for example, cost savings, right? Like typically it costs X dollars to physically inspect, and then with technology, they've driven certain efficiencies, time, money. Yeah, if you guys got some case studies, specific ones, that'll be great if you could share. Don't need to be shy. All three of you got live products, so don't need to be shy.
Yeah, so for the question, Joseph,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh no. Actually, for my side is that because the sad thing lah, when it comes to tracking and authentication, it's always a cost factor at this moment. Yeah, you will definitely increase the cost. So it's where you see is there going to be increase in value in your margin or in your sales, then to adopt this. Yeah, because there's no way that by applying this technology, you're going to help to reduce the cost. You have to tag every single product. You have to add extra process to the production itself. You have to add a tag to the product itself as it's shipped from the destination, or you add a tracker. You have to store the information on blockchain. Blockchain requires gas fee. So all these require costs. So how do you justify all these costs? Is the only way now, from what I see moving ahead, is by cutting away it will go more and more direct from farm to fork, to put it this way. As we progress with the IoT, with the sensor, right, you'll find that a lot more and more of this middleman or this trader will be cut off. Only then can the cost benefit be able to be translated to the customer. That's from my side, my experience. Yeah, Gary, any opinion on this one?
Yeah, I agree with Jason. Yes, yeah, similar. But we have two parts where I think the business owners needs to look at it. Cost, yes, it goes up. But I think for us, in terms of efficiency, Jason was talking about documentation. Because in our businesses, we got document team, shipping team, finance team, and we got sales team. And then when you don't have a platform and see everything in one go, you're going to say just in this first example, it costs you just to get a person to replace that. There's already a huge cost saving. then from a product perspective, our customers' average premium after they have tagged their fruits, right, is close to between 15 to 20%. And in some cases, it went up to as high as 40%, right? So this is where I think that you will basically see the efficiency savings, as well as I think that premium that consumers basically will reward you for it. So if you look at cost, I think that's definitely part of it. But I think the reward is something that we just have.
Yeah, and this is a point that love to hear Alan's thoughts also, because of course that technology, you're not implementing it for fun, right? There's always a certain lever or driver, and likely it's a function of, let's say, time or money, right? If you're reducing risk, that's a function of money as well, right? So I'm just thinking from big agri-food manufacturer or supplier's point of view, has the technology make sense from a cost perspective today? Like applying it as if, are they getting enough efficiencies, or is it like hey, I want to do some CSR, nice to have, right? What's the realistic view?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, right? So the case is, do you, there is additional cost of implementing any technology solution, right? I think that's the fact. The question is, how much cost savings can you get through efficiency gains? That's one element. But the other aspects around consumer trust, for example, I think that those are aspects that perhaps you can't really put a immediate price to it. The question is, how much would you be willing to kind of flip over as a consumer? Do you pass on the cost to the consumer to do that? So we have, for example, a case where we've implemented the coffee example, where if you kind of have the view of a circular economy, there's an option, for example, that allows the consumer to tip the farmer or tip the community, right? Again, that is a concept to see whether ultimately, if you're interested in buying organic coffee, for example, the actual profits or the actual additional premium of implementing this solution gets back to the community involved. So those are kind of models that are put in place. One other thing that I would also highlight is that in a lot of these solutions, you could definitely go to the extreme, for example, and track every piece of every case that goes out, every crate, every lot, for example, or every temperature reading. Again, this is going to be very cost prohibitive. There are cases where you may not track every single temperature reading. You may want to do this at a batch basis. Again, there's a debate on is it effective or not. But I just want to bring this up more from the perspective that there's a spectrum in which you can probably implement some of these solutions. You need to figure out what the spectrum is, what makes sense, the level of risk that you are willing to take, and depending on some of the items that we're looking at, whether it's fresh produce and perhaps some of the high quality stuff, perhaps there is people are willing to pay a premium for that. But maybe for the more, I guess, common kind of food item, perhaps it's not really an option, because safety and well-being of everybody, that's it's something that we all need to bear. That's the cost of doing business. Otherwise, we won't even be in the business of supplying to some of these consumers. So those are the kind of considerations. No one single answer, I think, to that question, but I think those are perhaps a few things to bear in mind.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's very, very interesting line of thought there. And if we were to think about the 20th century consumer, right, it's increasingly people want to know more information, right? When you pick up a product off the shelf, can you trust it? Do you know really where it's from? And I think now it's not even just a food safety thing, right? People are looking at stuff like sustainability. Is it fair trade? So I think actually the technology part could actually impact even not just the bottom line in terms of risk, but even the upside, right? Because you improve your branding as a manufacturer, as a retailer. So I think that's a quite interesting point to touch as well. So given all these benefits, it's quite clear, right? The incentives on why to digitize, why to get more data. I think it's a good time to move on to challenges, right? The narrative, it's pretty sound. Why then is adoption not as high as we would like it to be, right? So maybe we can hear from a small SME, smallholder farmers perspective from maybe Gary and Jason, and then maybe from large MNCs, which are IBM's type of clients, how that looks like.
Jason first. Now
Okay,
your turn.
you're fast this time. Okay, I deal with a lot of SME bringing their products to China. So basically, I think maybe close to 50 SME going to China already. Okay. So to them, a lot of these brand owners, first and foremost concern is on the sales profit margin, because when they go to China, they need to make money to cover the additional cost of shipping to China, the additional marketing cost, the additional cost in opening up all these sales channels. Like for them to list a product into Ocado, for them to get a partner to list the product onto the Taobao, onto the JD, all these are costs. And the worst thing is that all these costs will translate to higher price. And with a higher price, they have to compete with other players. And not just the local players, but bigger players who are exporting a larger volume at a lower cost as compared to them. So when it comes to like to track, to brand their product, a lot of them become very hesitant about it, very afraid of committing more cost to this. So that's why when we first started, and also what we are doing now, is that we actually incorporate the technology into the import label, something that is a must-have when going to the China. So that every single product going to China under the food law, you must put a label. So we put our blockchain technology, we put our QR tracking, so to minimize this impact on them. And then from this technology itself, we see what is the best way for them to help to grow their business. Take for example, using the QR, since every product is a unique QR, to develop loyalty program, where customers can help to scan to verify the product, to understand more about the product, and also to gain loyalty points. And these loyalty points can be in future used to exchange for the products as well. So these are some of the programs that we have in place to work closely with SME. So this is the experience from my side. Okay, so Gary.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. So for me, I think same problem as was Jason and I used to work, where I was the business owner, and I definitely think about cost as the number one, right? So it's a natural thing for all business owner to be worried about cost, because like most of us in F&B, the right point is that we don't have the kind of margins, right? So you want to put something onto cost, you need to know the return. So it's not going to be easy, but having said that, I think one of the biggest problem that we are using the data that we're getting is to ensure that we can help working capital, which is actually the financial gaps that Dimuto is really trying to address as well. We don't look at credit in the old way. We actually look at the fact that, making sure that everything is safe and everything is sustainable is very important. But at the same time, you got to make sure that you can help the business owner get the working capital that they need so that they can actually grow. So I think this is where the incentive for people to adopt technology is something that they can in turn get a benefit that they feel that is going to help them grow their business. So it will take time, but like I said, you need a lot of real case, and basically we are probably the bit of a frontier kind of guys in front of it, like Jason and myself, right? We went together in Chengdu before, and then talking about this in China. Not many people know how big that market is until you are there. So, I think it's going to be a bit of a climb at the beginning, but it will probably get better.
Alan, thoughts from let's say big at scale, big companies, right?
Yeah, so I think there's always a question about the level of investment that you need to make, and whether you want to take it, if you look at it as a single SKU or single product, it's probably never going to make sense. And also, if you look at Singapore as the kind of the market, the target market, it's going to probably be very hard to justify that level of investment. So I think those are things to consider. What I've found helpful in those regards is, I think, at least from a solution perspective and food value chain perspective, I think we need to look at it across the globe. And in some cases, we are the consuming end of that value chain. In some cases, like Gary and Jason has gone out right, to work with the different parts of the value chain to incorporate that and be part of that mix. So I think that's one thing to think about. The technology challenges, the other aspects is as we are looking at perhaps a more diverse value chain, it's almost as I think one of the things that Gary talks about is this messy middle concept. The reality is that you're going to be dealing with multiple parties with different systems, different standards along the way. So the other aspect is also, other than just figuring out how they actually talk to each other, do I actually have the right access to those data to be able to get hold of that? What's the policy in place to make sure that there is no unintended use of that data? Because again, supplier relationships are very sensitive. So one of the things that's been looked at is also consent to the data. And also if you look at certain markets, is just the concept of data residency. Do I have ability to hold your data outside of your jurisdiction? I think that's some of the challenges that comes to mind. And I think some of it which can solve from, I guess, where we're focused on, but of course some of these involves greater discussions with the regulators and the different jurisdictions.
Yeah, thanks for sharing it. I think in a more forward-looking light, right? Talking about collaboration, talking about having standards across the ecosystem. What do you think is the value there, right? Because from a commercial standpoint, I care about me, right? As whether I'm an SME, I'm a big agri-food company owner. I think about how does this affect my margins, my branding. But why do you think there's a need to collaborate, right? For multiple parties to from a technology standpoint, collaborate in an ecosystem, and maybe you can share some thoughts from the Food Trust project which you guys did as well.
I think there's no choice. We have to collaborate. It has to be something that I would say even competitors have come on board to work together. And we've convened from a Food Trust perspective, we've convened an advisory council that's made up of some of the bigger brands that you would imagine in the current supply chain. And again, these folks are competitors in the day. But if you want to really tackle the problem of food safety or improve the whole value chain, you need to get people who are contributing different parts of data to sit down together and really be able to agree on how they can exchange information with each other, right, on a need-to-know basis, but yet have the necessary safeguard to make sure that whatever they're sharing is on a need-to-know basis, not more than they are willing to do or agreeable to do. So that's something that I think we need to balance. Sharing enough so that there's enough level of traceability in the system, trust, but on the other side, having enough safeguard to make sure that information is not misused, right? Those are the kind of the two things that probably we need to balance.
Yeah, I also like to add this because Alan and I work, right? So Dimuto is also one of those companies that is actually have an API into IBM Food Trust. And the way we collaborated is we're like the RAM builders to get onto their very, very, very good highway, so that we're basically getting the smaller SMEs to get onto the highway. So it's sort of like collaboration becomes a norm going forward, because there are different kind of difficulties that we are now facing. And actually, like what Alan is actually saying, it's sometimes easier for us to come together, and what used to be adversaries or competitors, at the end of the day, you actually can bring more value by coming together rather than trying to fight the market your own.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And bearing in mind time, we'll just wrap up with just two short questions that we've got from the audience, which I think fits in quite nicely. So the one from Mike, do you see a trend on regulating bodies willing to enforce the use of TNT technologies? If each of you want to give a thought, quick 10 seconds one. Yes, no, do you think they will enforce it? Do you think that it should be enforced?
For me, is they want to enforce, but I think they're going to be barking up the wrong tree. I think regulation shouldn't be leading the way when it comes to this, because every country, the more a country tries to regulate, the other countries that is going to be importing will even put more regulation on top of it. So sometimes too much regulations just sort of like hinders the business, but that's what they will try to do.
I think just a quick one for me is that I don't think regulation works. I think at the end of the day, it's the customers that buy the product. No matter how much regulation you have, it doesn't force the customer to buy your product. So emphasis is still your product. We are selling a product, you focus on the product. Yeah, and how to show the quality of the product.
I think it's going to be hard to regulate any specific technology. You probably can regulate or encourage the application. So I think that's to Jason's point. Maybe from a regulator perspective, you can encourage that, to say that for a world-class solution, it needs to have these attributes. But really, I think the way in which you achieve that, I think that's going to be up to the industry. That's my thought. I don't think they can necessarily say everybody needs to have a track and trace solution. Perhaps they can get everybody on the table to agree on what that solution looks like, but I don't think they can go that far. That's my view.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks so much. And with that, I'd like to wrap up. Thanks so much to the Lim team plus Gary for the very interesting insights. And I think the audience had the pleasure of hearing your views, folks who have been in this industry for a big number of years. So with this, I'd like to pass the time back to Belle to just quickly wrap up this session. Thanks, Belle.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph, and thanks all the speakers as well. I'm sure everyone had very exciting time listening to all your expertise. Yeah, so as we are coming to an end, we would like to take this chance also to extend the opportunity for any of you who are keen to work with our startups, Tribe Academy, or OpenNodes as a whole. Please feel free to reach out to Joseph or myself. Our emails are written there, and we will get back to you shortly. Likewise, we'd like to thank SGTech for co-hosting this webinar. Join them in the third installment of their Cloud Apprentice Appreciation Series and hear from industry experts about concrete steps that you can take to start your cloud native journey. And this includes IMDA's Go Cloud program. So if you're keen in joining them on the 15th of October, please feel free to scan this QR code here. And lastly, we know that this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There must be a lot of other questions or other comments that you have. So please feel free to use your phones to scan this QR code here. It will lead you to a feedback form, and you can write your comments for us. You can let us know which speakers you would like to continue connecting with, and we'll also follow up with this at the end of the day. For all of you who might not have your phones beside you, the website or the link is tinyurl.com/foodsafety-feedback. And with that, I would like to thank everyone once again, both the speakers as well as the participants, for joining us. And I'll just leave this slide on for a bit. But yeah, thank you everyone, and I hope that you have a great day ahead.
Yep, thanks everyone. Take care.